Today we're diving into the truly scary story of John Wayne Gacy.
The killer clown.
Yeah. The case is really infamous. And there's a reason, right? A friendly neighborhood clown.
Right.
Who's secretly a serial killer. It's almost hard to believe.
It's a case that just gets under your skin. It's like this ultimate betrayal of trust. This guy was out there making balloon animals for kids 1 minute. And then,
Gacy's crimes happened between 1972 and 1978. And even just saying that out loud, it's creepy.
It's definitely a dark chapter. Thinking about the victims, the families, it's a lot to unpack.
Yeah. So one of the things that makes this case so disturbing is that duality, right? You have this friendly clown persona, Pogo, but then there's this horrifying reality of a monster preying on young men and boys. I mean, that's straight out of a nightmare.
It's like a real-life Jekyll and Hyde situation.
Right.
Really forces us to look at that mask that people wear, how we can be so wrong about someone. Like, who do you really trust? How do you know?
Yeah. And it's not just a few victims. We're talking at least 33 young men and boys. And the fact that he buried most of them in the crawl space under his house, I mean, that detail is just bone-chilling.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a level of depravity that's hard to comprehend. And what's even more disturbing is that there wasn't a pattern to his victims. They came from different backgrounds, different social circles. You couldn't say, oh, he only targets this type of person. So it creates this feeling of randomness, like anyone could have been a victim.
Exactly. It's terrifying. And you wonder, how did he do it? How did he get all these young guys alone?
Well, that's the thing about Gacy. He was incredibly manipulative. Really charming, apparently. A lot of times he'd lure them in with promises of work or money. He was a contractor, so it wasn't like totally unbelievable.
So he used that.
He used it. And once he had them alone, well, it was a different story. He would restrain them, torture them, and then eventually kill them.
It's just so calculated. And then to think about burying them under his own house, it's almost too much.
It definitely suggests a real need for control, a total lack of remorse. When the police finally searched his house and found those bodies, it was a shock. And it really showed, I think, the true depths of his depravity.
So I'm thinking, what was going on in his mind? Was he a psychopath?
Well, it's complicated. Gacy's psychology is something that's been debated for years. There are experts who believe he had a lot of those classic psychopathic traits. Superficial charm, no empathy, and this complete disregard for the consequences of his actions.
Right. So how did it all end? How was he caught?
The beginning of the end was the disappearance of a 15-year-old boy named Robert Piest. Piest was last seen with Gacy, and so the police, they immediately focused on him as a suspect.
Makes sense. So what happened? Did he confess?
Well, it was a long investigation. The police, they put Gacy under constant surveillance. They got a search warrant for his house, and that's when they uncovered the horrifying truth of the bodies. All those bodies buried in the crawl space. I mean, at that point, with all that evidence, Gacy confessed.
It's crazy to think about how Gacy's case, as horrible as it is, it actually pushed forensic science forward. It's like some good came out of this darkness,
Yeah, that's true. The sheer number of victims, it forced forensic investigators to develop new techniques. Back then, in the 70s, the ways of analyzing skeletal remains weren't as advanced as they are now. But because of the Gacy case, there were major breakthroughs in identifying people from their skeletons. And those techniques, they're still crucial in crime solving today.
So what about the trial?
Oh, it was huge. It was a media circus. I mean, everyone was following it. His defense team tried to argue that he was insane, but the jury didn't buy it. They found him guilty, and he was sentenced to death.
Right, and he was executed in 1994.
That's right.
Gacy's case, it didn't just end in 1994. The impact of it, it's still felt today, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. It really shook the entire country. It was like this wake-up call about stranger danger. Parents had to start having these tough conversations with the kids about the fact that danger could lurk anywhere, even in places that seem safe.
It's sad to think that, even now, some of Gacy's victims are still unidentified.
That's true. But the work continues.
Right.
There are still efforts going on to use DNA testing in forensic genealogy to identify those victims, to try and give those families some closure. It's a long process, but it's important.
So after going so deep into this case, what's the takeaway? What can we learn from all of this?
I think, for me, the biggest takeaway is that we can't be naive. We can't just assume that someone is safe based on how they look or how they act. You never really know what's going on beneath the surface. And, the Gacy case also shows how important forensic science is. It's about finding the truth and about getting justice for the victims and for their families.
It's a heavy story, but an important one. And I think it leaves us with a lot to think about. Like, how do we view the people in our own lives? How do we make sure we're safe? How do we protect ourselves? It's scary, but these are questions we can't ignore.
I agree. We have to keep asking these questions. Even though it can be uncomfortable, it's about awareness. It's about being informed.
Yeah.
And it's about protecting ourselves and our loved ones. We have to learn from these dark chapters. It's the only way to move forward.
Well said.